We're going to do something a bit different on Golfing Focus in this video. This time we're going to show you the result of our recent interview with one of Europe's leading club fitters, Simon Cooper at Precision Golf, who amongst others has looked after the bag of former European Ryder Cup legend and captain Colin Montgomerie for many years. So let's get straight into it and run through what Simon had to say when he let me pick his brains as to what regular amateurs can realistically learn from the clubs and setups the pros and the PGA, Champions and LPGA Tour are using. Welcome back to the Golf and Focus channel, everybody, and a huge thanks to Simon today at Precision Golf and the awesome studio we've got here for letting us pick your brains today on clubs. Winter's coming, obviously it's a good time to sort of have a look at your bag, etc. And on our channel we have a bit of fun and sort of do a lot on what the top pros on PGA and Champions Tour and LPGA Tour are playing. And sort of before we get into the sort of details of some of the drivers, their irons and wedges, sort of 5 high-level questions that come up a lot of the time in our comments and stuff like that. The first is which is around quality, as in these players are so good, and they are so far removed from regular punters like myself and your average Saturday golfer. Can we really take anything from what clubs they're using, or are they just so much better we should ignore it and just worry about ourselves?
No, I think they are. You're right to say they are very different animals than the rest of us. I mean, I don't think many people realise they're playing to handicaps of the equivalent +8, +10, and tournament setups. They are incredibly good, but they're still, the clubs are just the tools they use. So whilst they might have slightly different or slightly kind of modified versions that they use, it's still relevant to look at what they're using, because they're using something for a particular purpose, and that's something that we can all learn from.
Right. Okay. Second point of they're all paid, as in if someone moves or whatever, Callaway or Titleist will just build them whatever they want. Therefore, if you see what they're using, they're paid to play it anyway. Therefore, we get a lot of comments of ignore it because they're paid to play it. There's nothing there for it to take from it.
Actually, far fewer are paid than you think now. It used to be the case much more. I think you get the big players like a Rory or a Tiger or a Justin Thomas, or the kind of the feature players that they're using their advertising and marketing. Yes, they're on paid contracts, but again, whilst that's to play a brand, not a specific model, so they still have choice within that brand's range of what to use and how they use it and what courses they play what on. So there's still relevance, because Tiger using a 5-wood for PGA Tour golf, and then we'll put his 2-iron in the bag for the Open. He's still doing that for a reason. So whilst yes, there might be a like now, rather than an upfront contract, there might be a if you play our driver and win, there's a win bonus kind of setup. But they're still playing again certain products for particular reasons rather than just.
So they won't be forced to, like Titleist thing, like the GT drivers. The Titleist guys won't be forced into, you got to play the GT this week, because
the ones who are on the full bag contracts, then they will have to. Because they're the flagship players. They're the real kind of top line ones, like Ludwig, Orberg. He's their poster boy, and they're paying him a lot of money up front in the year to be their flagship, and so they will be in the newest models as quickly as possible. I think it's quite telling now. Very few of them now are in that position, so it's quite telling how quickly the players change. That tells you how good a product is. Because if they take time to change, then they still like their old one and they're struggling to beat it. If they change quickly, then they've beaten it straight away.
Right, okay. So that if you're sort of like top 80, 90 PGA, LPGA, Champions Tour, you're not going to be pushed like that.
They're not paying upfront contracts like they used to. They still obviously want them in the latest products, but the players now will only put them in when they're happy. So we have seen in the past a player switch in and then switch out. So you go into one of the earlier models, the stealth models. Rory was in, or Dustin went into stealth and back into sim. Now you'll only see it go in when it's better. Now,
so even following that, like the ones that are genuine free agents, like Adam Scott and Cantley and stuff like that, can you learn more from them, or because of what you said, if there's not actually that many?
You can potentially learn maybe a little bit more. I think because there is no commercial advantage other than, say, maybe a win bonus structure for them to go into it. So I think whilst we'll see players switch pretty quickly into the newest model, you do occasionally see someone sticking in an old model. I'll use Tiger. He's not a free agent, but he was using an M3 5-wood and he just switched, I think, out of it. So it's interesting seeing some players how long they stick with certain models. Like Justin Rose, when he left TaylorMade, he played. I think it was one tournament he played a 2000. Or one player, might be Justin Rose, played a 2008 model burner a few years back in the US Open. So sometimes players can be a little fickle in what they do and don't switch into. But
I think you guys at Langer, don't you, who just will test anything and everything.
Jordan Spieth, Titleist couldn't get Jordan Spieth out of his 913 driver until a couple of models ago. He religiously stuck with it because it gave him a particular flight window. He was comfortable with it. I mean, Christ knows why with his driving, but he was comfortable with it and so stuck with it. But I think he liked the trajectory. The lower launch and higher spin flight gave him what he wanted to see, rather than higher launch and lower spin that the new models gave him. So there's something, you can learn something from all of them, but you've got to look at the relevance of it as to whether it makes sense for you as well.
Okay. Sort of moving on to number 4 is cost, I think, for a lot of people, in terms of they're playing different courses. They can just go to a van, grab that, or I'm playing the Scottish Open this week, I'll just grab a utility iron, etc. That and time as well, really. I was laughing reading something about Fitzpatrick when he moved from, I think, his ping irons to the Titleist T100s,
I think,
along with a ball change or whatever, because it was giving him a little bit more flight and spin. Like, we don't have time to test that, and obviously cost, we can't do that. So does that take away a little bit from what you can get from in terms of they can't just grab?
I don't think it ever takes away from it. They're always doing it for a reason and a benefit. So, but I think the thing to be realistic about is how much benefit they will go for a one-shot a tournament benefit, because that's worth a heck of a lot of money to them. So Fitzpatrick going into a Titleist ball and those Titleist irons, now there could be for him a major winner, some kind of commercial arrangement there, but equally speaking, he doesn't change unless it's better. He's stuck with those I200s for years and years and years and won majors with them, or a major with them. So if he saw a 1.5 yard gain, or a slightly steeper descent angle, or a slightly preferable ball flight the way he wanted it to be, they can change for that minutiae, which then wouldn't be worth us changing for that. So again, it's making sure that if you're going to change something, it's worthwhile changing it. Make sure there's value in it.
Okay.
So we would always say to someone, we want a set of clubs to last someone. It's got to provide value. Is sort of determined by the player a little bit. Some players think 2 yards for £700 is value. I wouldn't for my own game, but and for some players you've got to go 20 yards to make it value and changing. But whatever gives you good value, it's making sure there's some longevity to it and there's a really backed up reason for making a change, rather than just willy-nilly switching in and out.
Right. Okay. And last one, I almost apologise for asking, but just we have had it of LPGA players do not use women's clubs. From that, there's no such thing really, is it, in terms of like, there is
the specific design. Ping with the GLE series, it is specifically designed for ladies, and in that it's specifically designed for lower club speed. So from a head structure point of view, if you're swinging at 60 miles an hour rather than 110, the way the head loads, the way that the structure of the head gets the energy back into the ball and the face can be different. The effects on, you need a higher launch, higher spinning head at lower speeds to get the thing in the air. So actually there are some specific designs around lower club speeds to help with elevation.
But the LPGA players are not.
But they're not using it, because they're just playing. They're playing
as a normal,
but actually there's less difference than you'd think in terms of what the tour players play to retail. We've had this conversation with a number of the brands and the reps and the tech agents who come through, and there will be certain things that they do. There's an LPGA player, LET player that we're working with who plays Titleist woods, and what they've done with one of the models is added a load of hot melt to the front of it to pull the weight down and forwards to move the CG forwards to reduce spin. The frame is exactly the same, but they've weighted it internally to suit her specific needs, and that's where they might do a little bit of work with the tour players clubs to get them really suiting them. That we might choose to do, but we wouldn't do that because we don't want to ruin the face and ruin the club. But that's the kind of thing that they would change. But essentially, yeah, the LET and LPGA players are using. They're not lady-specific models because of the amount of speed that they generate.
Right. Okay. So I suppose there is something to learn. That's probably is the good.
There's always something to learn. But it's looking at, rather than just a kind of the marketing of, oh, they've switched to a new model, or actually, I'm a cynic, but rather than being overly cynical and go, they've just done it because they're paid. It's getting to the point now they're earning enough that what they earn outweighs what they would get paid from a contract.
Right.
So it's far more worthwhile than playing what's right and earning more through position than taking an upfront payment and then potentially missing out on win bonuses and things because it just doesn't play as well.
Okay. So like if we then go into sort of the different clubs, looking at drivers, sort of highlight the average driver swing speed. The LPGA is probably most similar to your average regular golfer. Therefore, is it most sensible for your average golfer to look at the LPGA first because of that, or it's not that simple?
No, there's relevance in that. It isn't quite as simple as that, but actually, the ladies' game generally, most male amateurs can learn a heck of a lot more by watching them because there's relevance to the distances they're hitting, the positions they find themselves in, the club selections they're taking, and there's far more relevance to the way most players play by watching the ladies than the men. The men, it's a bit like saying, well, Usain Bolt runs the 100 metres in 9.8 seconds, why can't I? Well, because he's very fit, very long leg, and I can't achieve that. So I can't achieve what the ladies run the 100 metres in either. But in golf, where the power ratio is that much less on the ladies' tour, I think you'd be surprised at how many of the ladies would outdrive the average man. But it's more relevant. It's not 70 yards past where most amateur men are driving it to or more. It's 20 yards. So it's a much more relevant thing to look at.
Yeah. So does that then, if you started them, because the PGA guys are so far ahead, it doesn't.
There can still be relevance. There's still, again, to the club selections and the jobs and the reasons why they're choosing them. There's still relevance because for example, they might choose to play a lofted fairway wood rather than a hybrid rather than driving iron because of a certain shot type they want to hit, and that's relevant whether it's the men, the women, amateurs, the G4D guys and girls, the disabled golfers. Those they're still go back to what I said, but they're still picking something to do a job, no matter what tour they're playing on.
And so that neatly, like the woods, the hybrids, the sort of driving irons. That's probably where the sort of cost thing comes in for most people of we can't go, we're playing this 1 week or whatever, in and out, and that's where you've got to probably make a decision based on your home club. And that it feels to me of looking at the number of the Champions Tour and LPGA are definitely more relevant in terms of they're using more hybrids, some of them, but I think I saw Freddie Couples has got.
Yeah, he's got 6 hybrid. I still can't quite. I think how high that's going to go for his speed. It clearly works for him and he's happy with it, and ultimately that's the most important thing. But we would always say, you've got to get good advice on what you're buying and why, for one. And I know I'm bound to say that, but that way you're making reasoned decisions on why you're purchasing something, rather than just going, I like the look of that, I like the concept of that. Theory's great, but in practice, does it work for you? But we'd look at where does someone play their golf, and what kind of course style. Do you travel a lot? But ultimately, the only bits, the extravagant would be maybe the kind of the between sort of longest iron and fairway woods, that transition. You could go 2 options there to give you 2 options on flight, and you could go a slightly different bounce option in a wedge. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need a high lofted driver, a low lofted driver.
Which is what the top pros will do.
They don't do that. They don't do that either.
Right. Okay.
It's really about at the top end of the bag. It's about strategy calls, whether it's off the tee or playing into greens. And at the bottom end, it's turf interaction and maybe a specialist club, depending on a course setup or a course style.
And are there any sort of simpler rules of thumb in terms of, I know each in theirs, but as in you should definitely have more than sort of 2 or 3 hybrids sort of generally up there. Should be looking at them, or higher lofted fairway woods and stuff like that. Stay away from utility irons because you need a higher swing
generally,
speed.
yeah. It's the kind of, if you're a low ball hitter, stay away from a driving iron. You know, and actually just accept what loft gives you trajectory. You know, so we do so many more sets now that a driver, like a 10.5 degree driver, will measure more like 11.5, 12 degrees of loft. If you're then trying to play a 15 degree fairway off the ground, chances are you're probably not getting an airborne. Yeah. So we will do a lot of sets that's driver, 4-wood or 5-wood, and then 7-wood, to get a 3-wood ball flight and a 5-wood ball flight. It's about getting the right balance of flight and carry to give you the right.
And is there any particular
distance.
reason why the ladies in the Champions Tour are racing hybrids more than the PGA?
Yeah, they got lower speed. So lower speed means less spin, generally less lift. So unless you're a really high ball hitter, you're going to create less spin, and so in order for them, they're playing, the tall level players are playing into firmer, faster greens with the pins more tucked. Yeah. So they are going to need the ball coming in steeper and landing steeper to get the control. Okay. So you know, don't go thinking that the pin positions they're playing on are where your weekly medals on. Not even close. You'd be shocked at where they'd stick the pins on your home course for the tour players. They wouldn't even look like they're on the greens. So they're prioritising a club that gets it airborne, up in the air quickly and landing softer. Okay. But then they come over to the Senior Open and they stick a long iron back in because they want it down and forwards under the wind because of the conditions.
But you've got to be careful. Utility iron, you've got to be a bit more sort of fairway woods hybrids are more likely to be.
They're more forgiving. Yeah, long irons are just hard to hit, and again to get respective carry distance progression at the top end. That's again, you're seeing faster faces on hybrids than irons, and faster faces on fairway woods than hybrids, and swing speed progression to help get ball speed progression to help get carry distance. Okay. So I dropped a 3-iron years back because my 3-iron, 4-iron, if I really caught my 3-iron, I could carry a full club longer than the 4-iron, but if I didn't quite get it, there wasn't any point hitting it. So that's where a lot of people see it in 5-iron, 4-iron, or 6 to 5-iron, where you see that distance progression drop right back. That's because you're not getting enough flight and ball speed progression to hit.
So that's an easy test for someone with their set of when you get to the higher irons. Yeah. And into your what's your gap distance? Yeah. And if it's low,
you need 5 mile an hour progression. Okay. 5 mile an hour on average, you're looking at 10 yards. Yeah. On average. So if you're not getting 5 miles an hour progression club to club, then you've got too many clubs in that section.
Okay. And that's where you can start to switch out and experiment with.
Yeah. And don't forget, 14 clubs is a maximum. Yeah. There are a lot of players that would benefit from playing 10 or 11 clubs. Because they're too loaded up in, particularly the upper end of the irons. I think, I must play a 5-iron and a 4-iron because I've always played that. Yeah. And then you add in a hybrid and you end up with 2 or 3 clubs that basically do the same job. But what's the point? Just have one, and then it's definite what the right option is.
Keeping it simple. Yeah. I think I'm probably one of those. The 4 will have to go, I think, at some point. Yeah. And just thinking, obviously, the top end of the bag, we see there seems to was flex in terms of who in the PGA, who's using or any of them using regular shafts and stuff like that. So it's a bit like it's weight is more important, isn't it? In terms of
100%. Yeah, I mean, so the tour players will be using very stable shafts all the time because they're used to that feel. It feels controlled. Yeah. But you're seeing some of the long drive players using the equivalent of a soft regular. So, but they're up at 150, 160 mile an hour club speeds versus 120, 125 that the tour players are using. Yeah. So what flex does is a little bit of flight, a little bit of launch and spin, but a little bit. But it's feel. It's so a lot of the tour players, they played heavy, stiff clubs for a long time. So they developed their game around that feel. So they trust it. You can have a much softer shaft that had the same weight and balance characteristics, but because as you start down, you feel it wobble, back off, what's going on? Whereas some players, with a quieter swing will like to get a bit of kick and it feels like this club's giving you something back. Someone who has a sort of a sharper tempo, that amplifies a little bit of the feeling from the shaft. It doesn't mean the face is going all over the place, but a tighter feel is going to feel more comfortable, and so it's a trust element to that as well.
Why do you think it seems to be an obsession with flex a little bit in terms of, what do you think?
Because go back 20 years, there were so many fewer options, and the differentiating factor was flex, because every shaft has a flex denomination on it. And so that was you're a regular or a stiff, because you hit it this far, you swing it. We didn't even know what speed we spun it back then. We didn't have launch monitors. So you went into a regular or stiff because that was the only option. But there also wasn't a scientific understanding of what the shafts do. It was just, if you're slower, you go in a softer. But regular to stiff is between 2 and 5% of the bend of a shaft.
Right.
It proportionally is an incredibly small amount. Now it does do something, but it's about that much. Whereas if you go from 105 gram shaft to 130 gram shaft, well, one's going to move better than the other. It's levers. So you get someone like Koepka who really kind of pulls hard on the handle. Well, if he doesn't have mass to pull against, the club doesn't drop into plane for him. You're trying to equalise energy into the handle and inertia in the club. It's physics in that respect. It's energy matchup. And if you get an imbalance, then you either overpower the weight and lose it and have to back off the shot to control it, or it's so darn heavy that in order to get it, it's like chaining a club to the wall. You move, the club doesn't come with you. You've then got to back up to deliver the club, and you get out of balance and out of time, and that's when you lose control of the club face.
And do you find people that tend to use too heavy clubs for them in terms of?
Used to. It's changed quite a bit. I think the last 5 to 10 years, the golfers got a lot more educated on what you should and shouldn't be using. So go back 10, 15 years, most players were too scared of playing too much loft and too soft a shaft. Now it's the other way around. People are much more worried about not going too stiff and not going too low in loft. So a lot of the education and the commentary coming out of the equipment side of the industry, the old SLTR loft up, that's definitely hit home. We're seeing a very different approach to flex and clubs now.
Right. Okay.
Thankfully.
Moving on to irons, one of the interesting things we've spotted, particularly in the PGA Tour, has been they've got mixed sets. The amount of them that are sometimes like 2-3 models in, and they're sort of like particularly at the high end, even sticking graphite shafts in like 3 and 4 irons. Is that something that amateurs can put, or is that sort of again a cost thing to do that? The relevance of that.
I mean, a little bit of that is so the mixed set is both good and bad options. So if you're mixing a set, there is an argument to say split sets are kind of the best of the bodge job, in that you are having to muddle together lofts and things to make the gaps work. If a tour player's doing it, it's because they want that progression in ball speed, or they want a slightly higher launch out of the longer irons to get height and carry distance and stopping power and distance progression. We're seeing more and more sets that have that inbuilt, so having to do it less and less. We don't build as many long irons as the tour pros use, so a lot of the time we're stopping a 5 iron. So you'll see them take, Scotty Scheffler goes into a Strixon driving iron at the top 2. And that part of that is it's deeper weighted, it launches it more, you get a bit of face tech to get a bit of ball speed progression. And he's using the Nippon the Modus Ghost, which is a graphite on steel. So it's a steel core and a graphite coating. That's still pretty sturdy, that's still a kind of 110 gram, that's a plank of a shaft, that's a very, very stable shaft. But it's still lighter than his iron, so he's using that to gain club speed progression. So again, we do that. Most amateurs will do that by going to a hybrid, because they then need the hybrid forgiveness and flight. The tour players, because they've got so much ball speed, they get a lot of height naturally, because essentially you can have the same launch angle as at 150 mile an hour ball speed as 120, but it peaks later, so it gets a lot higher. So they don't have to get it up in the air quite as much, hence they'll play longer irons more than they will hybrids.
But I suppose the nice thing looking at it is in terms of they obviously struggle to hit, like everybody.
And
they need some help.
They're having to hit them. The courses are that much longer. They're having to hit them more often now than they ever did. And they're also there now, as amateurs should be, prepared to just play what works and does the job for them. So hence you're seeing so many more mixes now.
Just picking up on the graphite point, the ladies seem to be like iron shafts, seem to be embracing graphite iron shafts. Is that something again that amateurs could, or is it just something to look
just
at?
a case of what
just,
works. So
is there a reason they're doing it much more than
well, I think again for historically a lot of the ladies tour played really shafts that were probably too heavy for them, because there was a bit of a black hole in that. The graphites were on the light side, and then the steels were heavy, so the control aspect, they'd historically been used to playing the heavier shafts just because that what was deemed more consistent. And then you saw Carrie Webb going into the nip on the 950, 95 gram steel, and seeing a lot more of the girls in the steel fibers, which either 80, 85 grams or 95. The composites covered that what I call kind of bridging weight between the lightweight graphites, where the light steels just aren't quite as stable. You've got much more material, so they can get much stiffer to weight. So you keep the weight down and get the stability up versus a lightweight steel. So it's much more relevant for them than the men's tour. And
so does that then translate to your sort of your average amateur more than
to a point? Yeah. We're doing more composites than we ever used to, but again, part of it is that the golfer is now more willing to just play what works rather than the pride of having to play a steel shaft. Steel goes down to 70 odd grams now. You don't use that weight very often because the walls are so thin. I think there are so many more options now around in that sort of 80 to 100 gram mark, whether it's light steel or composites, that and the composites are much more consistent than they used to be now as well.
So the tech is just getting better
a little bit, and they also want to hit it as far as they can. So there's no point saddling yourself with too heavy a shaft based on what I've always played. You get someone like a Nelly Corder who's in the I think she's in the steel fibers. Charlie Hull, who trains with Kate here, she's more of a aggressive action as she plays a steel, because the weight gives her something to pull against, whereas Nelly's much more kind of rhythmical and sort of longer, more languid swing, and doesn't have the same kind of physicality on the shaft, so the slightly lighter weight suits her. Same thing for amateurs.
So that means the good news for it is, because of that, there's now more options for everybody. Because
and this isn't rooted in tour. This is just that there are now just more options out there, and I think that we're seeing them coming onto tour more, and some of those players probably should have been using them for longer than they have been. But I think again we're now seeing the tour players embrace just whatever works, rather than wanting to look a certain way or wanting to be seen to be a certain way. You go years back to the mental training, Norman Faldo, all those guys in that era. There were players doing it, but no one wanted to admit to it because it was seen as a weakness. You kind of, God, you need a mental coach. Whereas now they all got them. So
just whatever it says in the scoreboard, that's the main thing. Moving on to the wedges, it's a bit of looking at. Is it like Vokey's like it feels like is the only show in town a little bit in terms of unless you've got one.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of very good wedges now. I think what Vokey as a brand do really well is they cover a lot of bounces, a lot of grinds and soul shapes and lofts, and there are a huge amount of options. And it's like Pro V1 ball, the brand, the positioning, the branding is so strong. They clearly do a lot of work on tour to get that support, and so some of they put in the hard yards with the tour players, and that's got the trust of them. Are they that much better than anything else? No, there are very, very good wedges out there. You look at some of the best wedge players out there, and they're not using Vokey wedges. Shane Lowry's not using a Vokey wedge. Some of the you look at Tiger is not using a Vokey wedge. So actually, are they that much better than anything else? No.
Because if you look at the numbers, I think particularly it's interesting the free agents. They're all using them. Even the ones who have, I know you said it's not as binary as it used to be, but that would sort of feel that if you sort of saw that free agents are all using Vokey, therefore they must be the best. But
there is some stock. I think what we're seeing this year. I mean, some of the wedges that you might not expect to be as high spinning as they are. Mizuno, very high spinning wedge. But they're a narrower sole. Are they quite as versatile, particularly on the turfs that they're playing, as some of the others? Maybe not, but they spin more than the Vokey. The Vokeys do still spin really well. And part of it is the tour guys change every 2 weeks on their wedges. It may be that Vokey, Argent, Bob, if Bob's out on the range, all the players want to go and see him in the same way that Scotty Cameron's out there, they'd all be going to Scotty for a putter. Whether Vokey types just work harder at getting the tour players into them, there is maybe something in that. But
there is more than one show in town, basically.
There is.
Yeah.
They say that the TaylorMade wedges we had great results with Ping, from testing, are seen to be the best in wet. There are a lot of good wedges out there. Once a player trusts a feel and a look, brand, then they, especially in the short game, they will orient back towards that as soon as they have a choice to. So I think some of it is that, like most of them go back to a Pro V1 ball.
Yeah.
Same thing. They're so highly trusted by all the players out there that there is an element of orientation.
And when you were saying Pro V1, do you mean like one of the versions?
One of the Titleist balls. Yeah, there's just huge trust of it on tour, and so that's why I think you see an awful lot of them. And they are very good balls. But as you say, there are some other very good balls out there as well.
Yeah. Because when you just look at the numbers, you just think, well,
it's big.
Yeah,
it's big.
It seems crazy.
Yeah.
And sort of moving on to the putters, that feels like, we're in a room full of putters at the moment.
Yeah.
They just all seem cussed. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Danielle Kang was on Instagram, and she researched the start of like putters like Sneed and Nicholas, whatever. She was drawing one with Scotty Cameron, and then he made one. It was a bit like, there's nothing I can like. There seems to be they're all prototypes. Therefore, don't really pay attention to what they're using putter wise, because it's all individual.
Again, there is relevant. I think the bit that makes that I think from the tour players that there's not a lot of relevance with, they're playing on really pure greens, very fast pace, and actually that means they don't have to hit the ball very hard. So the mallet styles have got very popular on tour because of distance consistency across the face. Actually, from a start line point of view, a blade putter, the start line can be more consistent, because actually the further back the weight is, it can kick the start line off a bit more if you miss hit it. But the distance is more consistent with a more forgiving putter. So if you're not having to hit it that hard, you lose some of the start line effect from the twisting of the head, but you gain the distance control.
Okay.
So
that mallet sort of dominance is for that reason.
There's a good chunk of that. Some of it's alignment. Again, you're looking at putter heads, like the personalised element. They have alignment markings that are very personalised to them. Kind of potentially one-offs in certain instances, or they'll get a different neck. Like Xander Schauffele's putter, you can't buy it. Well, I think they did a very limited run of it, but it's a particular neck style and a particular head shape. So it's a particular sort of face balance / toe hang profile for him that you can't buy. There are a heck of a lot of options out there. But putters are also something, I think, for the consumer. They're a bit more emotive than the full swing clubs. You want to love it. And tour players, when they're working, they love them. The moment they switch off and go cold, they'll switch out pretty damn quick. So that's also another element where you see players turning around. Don't watch them putt. If they're changing putter regularly, it's because they're not necessarily a great putter.
Because Matsuyama has seems to carry millions of them around.
But they're all very similar.
Right. Okay.
These ones. So if someone's changing their putter style a lot, then you're generally not. I would advise don't watch them. You look at the best putters in history. They don't change the putters. Tiger did for a little period, but back in the blade style. You've got Brad Faxon never changed putter style. Lauren Roberts never changed putter style. You look at some of the best putters out there at the moment. They've stayed in those putter styles for a very long time. And the reason being because it works. And if a player's searching for something, then they'll switch around, trying to find something rather than necessarily. If they make a switch and then stick with it, then they've probably found something performance-wise.
Right. Okay.
But if they're flitting around regularly through the year, it's probably more the archer. Putter design hasn't changed much over the years. Ping An was launched 40 or 50 odd years back, 50 odd years ago, more than, and they're still churning out. Every brand has a Ping answer, whether it's a Newport Scotty Cameron or a TaylorMade TP Soto, or they all do basically the same putter. There aren't. The torque balance principle is a very different one. and is quite fascinating in terms of, right, that's added another line in there, but it isn't a cure-all. It isn't right for everybody, and they're very good for holding out because you get a little bit less rotation from the face. It kind of stays on plane a little bit more, but on longer putts you can lose feel for the face. So it has pros and cons. But the principles of putter head design have not changed over the years. Hence we're seeing basically everyone doing the old Callaway number 7 shape. You're seeing everyone doing a Pianta shape. It's that they're all working around the same theories. What we're seeing much more is mass distribution changing a lot more.
What do you mean by that?
So whether it's front weighted or back weighted.
Right, okay.
So because that affects how the rotation rate and the stability of the putter through impact. Callaway had the 11 series where the weight was forward, and then the 10 series where the weight was back. They very similar head shapes, but they suit different stroke types. If you've got something that works, keep it. That's the don't change it for change's sake, because you'll probably ruin it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is something to learn. I suppose that is the key message, and it's just if there are little, I suppose it's rather than specifics, it is if there are trends happening, it is for a specific reason they're doing it, and that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Or know why they're doing it. If that applies to you, then you can use it. If it doesn't,
I think
ignore it.
the latter. Yeah, I think the latter. Go back to what you said about the Champions Tour, Seniors Tour, and the Ladies Tour going to more hybrids and lofted woods. It's because they're trying to get the ball up higher.
Yeah.
It's carry distance based because they're playing. Most of those tours are in the States, so they're playing more kind of target based golf. If you play on a links course, you don't want to stick the ball up in the air too much. It's got to be relevant to your game and where you play the majority of the golf, and does that suit the job roles that you're looking from that part of the bag for, and the shots that you want to see. There are not just us. There are other places out there that can give you good advice. So you make sure you test stuff and see what it gives you before buying it. Because it's very doable now. Loads of places have launch monitors, and you can compare a 4-iron to a hybrid, or a lofted wood to a hybrid, and see what gives you what results, be it height, carry distance, ease of use. So make sure you try it out first.
And that's the simplest starting point can just be how far are you hitting your ones just now, and if there's reduced gaps, then that's an area to potentially.
And the one thing that we would certainly look at is, what is the ball doing when it lands? Is it coming in flat and running, or is it coming in steep and stopping? That's really, really critical. A lot of places in the past have focused just on total distance. If you're playing to a green, the last thing you want is the ball pitching by the flag and cannoning through the back. Distance, yes, is important, but how is it getting there is also something to take into account.
So you're wanting your carry and your total, or is carry mostly more?
Carry's the most important number, but ultimately, how is it landing? Is it doing it if it's doing it with low spin, it's not going to stop. If it's doing it with high spin, it's going to stop. If it's doing it from height, it's likely to stop. If it's coming in low, it's not going to stop. So in that transition irons into woods, that's very much that case of, up to what iron is it worth using? Is it carrying far enough beyond the last one to make it worth using? And if it is it coming in really flat and then not going to give you the job roll when it lands that you want it to? All kind of really key things at that transition upper irons into woods.
But the one key thing is just because the pros are using it, unfortunately that magic doesn't come through the screen.
Yeah, it would be lovely, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would be lovely just to
you can't,
absorb a bit of magic of the pros.
You can't help it in terms of, you look at what are they using, and there's a bit of
it's the marketing's done that way as well. They use those players in the features because they know it makes a difference. So everything equipment-wise is basically validated by Tour, which one could argue is irrelevant to most players because we're not hitting 330-yard drives, but the product validation, how quickly the players take it up, and who's using what, there's still key numbers in the marketing side of it.
Yeah, and if they're changing something quickly,
it's because it's good product. And now they just want it to be good, and they can stay in something older a little bit longer if they want to. So if they're all switching quickly into a new model, then it's probably a good change. but
it might not be.
It might only be a small good change, but it's still they're all seeing a benefit if they're all switching.
And then there's a decision point for you of whatever it gives you by comparison.
Cost
is that
versus
worth
benefit? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Simon, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
That has been.
Pleasure. We could sit here for about 5
Yeah,
hours.
no, it's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. The let us know in the comments if we can persuade Simon to come back. If there's anything we want to ask, please stick it in there. Precision Golf. If they want to find you guys, what you're up to.
Yeah, we'll be precisiongolf.co.uk. We've got a YouTube channel as well, Instagram, but there'll be a new website in a couple of weeks, so that'll be going live. So the current website that will be updated very soon, which will show what we've got here a lot better. But yeah, you can find us online. We're in West Byfleet, so just outside of London, just out. If you do it by golf courses by St George's Hill, yeah. Give us a call, send us an email, any questions at all, let us know.
If you want to watch me, what Simon did went through the bag, whatever, let me keep my blades, which was worth everything. Whether I should keep the 4 or not, I'm not too sure now.
So that was I think that was part of the debate, wasn't it?
Yeah,
but
it
needs to be changed.
I'll keep it. I'll keep it. But thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Indeed. Thanks for seeing the next videos. You know what to do with those buttons on the screen. And as ever, most importantly, we hope you're enjoying your golf.